Orange County didn't invent shopping, but you could argue that South Coast Plaza and Fashion Island have raised it to something approaching an art form, an experience, a celebration of leisure and luxury. Now these two iconic shopping destinations, please don't call them mere malls, are turning 50. South Coast Plaza right now, Fashion Island later this year. So let's throw a birthday party, recall how they overcame naysayers, their wins and stumbles, their rivalry, and what the future holds as more shoppers go online. Joining me, one of the key planners of Fashion Island, Al Trevino, author of an upcoming history on South Coast Plaza, Kedric Francis, and longtime OC real estate chronicler, Martin Brower. They're next on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.
Hi, I'm RickReiff, and I'm talking with Al Trevino, Kedric Francis, and Martin Brower. Gentlemen, great to have you on. Kedric, Fashion Island and South Coast Plaza both turning 50 this year. How cool is that?
I think it's very cool that we get to sort of celebrate. They're both masterpieces of mid-century master planning, and I think often we don't appreciate how much both of them have given to the growth of Orange County in so many ways.
Yeah, and Martin, you know, it's 50 years old. That's a long time. There have a lot of shopping malls that have come and gone in 50 years, and yet these two large, destinations, if you will, have managed to survive.
As
Why do
we
you
were
think that
chatting
is?
before, the owners really put money into it and continue to improve them. You know, there are A, B, and C shopping centers. The B and C's are in trouble. The A's, like Fashion Island and South Coast Plaza, are not in trouble whatsoever, even with Amazon. People love to go to these shopping centers. They were designed not just with shops, the traditional straight mall, but they're designed to be an enjoyable experience.
Okay, well, and we're going to get into a little later just what the future may hold for the A malls as well. But first, let's tell the story of how these two malls came about. Nowadays, people look, oh, of course they were going to succeed, but that wasn't always the case. That wasn't always the perception. So let's begin with the story of South Coast Plaza. Here's how it's described in a recent documentary on Henry Sagerstrom by my PBS SoCal colleague, Maria Hall Brown.
With his success leasing the warehouses, Henry's personal interest in development blossomed. Property rezoned as industrial prompted construction, and various office complexes sprouted on the Sagerson property. In sync, the county's population grew, and giant retailers Sears and Make Company expressed interest in building a shopping center.
I received a call.
Hello, Henry. Bob Clemens here.
That indicated that Sears was looking to build a shopping center in Orange County and would like to see if we would be interested in talking with them. This was in December of 1962. We went to see John Wadham at the regional offices in Los Angeles, and Mr. Wadham said,
"We would like to build a store on your property, and we'd like you to see what we've done in Buena Park."
And I said, "Mr. Wadham, in developing a center with you, if we couldn't do better than that, then I don't think we'd want to build the center." And that was a pretty bold thing to tell the only prospect that you had, but it worked. We had a large delegation from the real estate brokerage firm Coldwell Banker come to see us about the time we were developing. And they left and said, "South Coast Plaza will never succeed because you don't have enough residential population base within 5 miles. But we went ahead anyway.
I thought this was crazy to build a shopping center where there was nothing.
These were not county roads, they were farm roads. In order to get to the coast, you had to go kind of zigzaggy through the beans.
To envision South Coast Plaza, Henry chose Victor Gruen, a pioneer in the design of shopping centers.
In our farming operations, we all knew that At 11 o'clock in the morning, you could almost set your clock by it. The wind would start blowing off the ocean, and it could be very cold. So we elected to go with the enclosed shopping center. The Gruen organization had been pioneering climate-controlled developments in the Midwest, and we felt that that could be a good thing for us.
He had a vision of what the center would actually look and feel like before it was realized, and he fought very hard to make that happen.
South Coast Plaza is very unique, and I think it's a result of the way in which Henry and the family basically have positioned and managed the business. The goal has always been to try to bring together the best retailers in every merchandising category.
We had retailers that were very much at the forefront at the time. One comes to mind, Joseph Magnin, which was the Barney's New York of its era. And that store, coincidentally, was designed by Frank Gehry.
Before I opened my own practice, I worked for Gruen's office, and Rudy Baumfeld was the design partner.
Rudy really was the person that designed South Coast Plaza.
Rudy introduced us to the Magnin family to do that project. Cyril Magnin came to the opening, I remember, and Victor Gruen came. It turned out great, actually. It was unusual. It wasn't like everything else they were doing. We won a big AIA award for it. It gave me a real jump start.
Henry pursued the Nordstrom family to open the first Nordstrom store outside of the Pacific Northwest.
I'm sitting there working at my desk, and all of a sudden I sensed somebody standing in the doorway, and I looked up, and here's this elegant, handsome, well-dressed man standing there, and he proceeded to introduce himself to me. He says, "I'm Henry Segerstrom, and my family and I own South Coast Plaza."
That conversation may have gone on for 10-plus years.
A couple old Swedes were not too swift, you know.
Until Henry finally convinced the Nordstroms that there was a great opportunity at South Coast Plaza.
He kept saying it's the best place, and we kept saying the rent's too high. Finally, we were both right, and we agreed. The commitment and the amount of money that it was going to be and how much we'd have to go and hawk to do this was disturbing, to say the least. But Henry held our hand through the whole procedure. We picked the best materials we could pick, the most expensive ones for the casework, for the rugs, sconces on the wall. Frankly, we wanted Henry to be proud of this thing. It is the most productive store in our entire company, and the linchpin for that is South Coast Plaza.
So I must say, an excellent documentary by Maria, and if viewers haven't seen it, they should try to see it. It's really a great story, and that was the excerpt on South Coast Plaza. So Al, tell me, you have some personal experience because you and Frank Gehry, the architect who's in there, the world famous architect, you and he have known each other. What's kind of what's your take on this South Coast Plaza story and how it happened?
Well, my take is quite different because I had done Laguna Niguel, and I was working for Victor Gruen at that time, and Frank Gehry was there at the time. He's been a lifelong friend of mine, but from that point, I'm also a Southern Californian. I was born in Los Angeles. I grew up in Pasadena. And so the climate is a very attractive aspect of growing up. My wife was born in Pasadena as well. Now, what I think is unique is that when we had an opportunity to develop Fashion Island, Welton Beckett originally was going to build or design an enclosed mall, and I objected to that. And how it changed is really a story in itself. But what is unique about Fashion Island is that at that time there were only 300 and some thousand people in Orange County. Nobody knew what was going to happen. The two May brothers, made a presentation to us at the Irvine Company. Originally, they wanted to have the Irvine Company donate the land or use the land on what is the west side east side of Newport Freeway. And then Mr. Thomas, who was president at that time, said, no, we're going to build our center down in Newport Beach. And so they then went over to the Segerstroms and said, we will help you build a center if you put our building agreed to put our building fronting on the freeway that existed. That is my understanding of how
So Irvine Company rejected the May Company, and they went to Henry Segerstrom, and thus was the start of South Coast Plaza. So any thoughts, Kedric, on just this origin of South Coast Plaza? Because it was a big risk at that time. People thought this guy was crazy, thinking he's going to put all this money into a shopping mall.
Yeah, and it is the family. You know, in the early '60s, when this started, Henry's father and uncle and cousin were involved in the family. It still is very much a family enterprise. But Al's definitely right. The major department stores were the reasons that shopping centers existed. We forget how important department stores were to sort of society and to shopping and to everything else. So those anchor stores are what was so important. What's impressive about Fashion Island and South Coast Plaza is how they've evolved as the department store's influence has somewhat diminished and waned in South Coast Plaza by the luxury aspect, which is, there's global brands there that don't exist in that combination at any owned shopping center. You may see them on the Champs-Élysées and other ways. And that was a specific intent of the ownership in the 70s when they already saw that there was sort of a glut of your average regional malls. They wanted to change South Coast Plaza, and they did.
Al you talked about freeway frontage, and that's the greatest difference between the two centers. I was with Welton Beck and Associates when we did Fashion Island before I came to the Irvine Company. And I wrote the news releases. I remember Fashion Island will be at the confluence of two freeways, the Pacific Coast Freeway and the Corona Del Mar Freeway. Neither of those came to being. So I typically say that Fashion Island may be the only regional mall in America without major freeway access.
Well, that's true. But the volumes on the Pacific Coast Highway MacArthur are almost equal to what freeways would bring into it.
Interesting, because many people would say why would anybody ever put a shopping center next to the water, because half of your drawing area is whales and fish, and that you can't get. But that's a very good point, and I think that speaks the affluence of this area. Martin, Orange County has been a pioneer in so many things, whether it's surfwear or fast food, you name it, and shopping. Shopping, in a way, I can recall in the 80s when Chris Anderson at the Orange County Register established the shopping beat. I wasn't here at the time. I'm back east. And that was the talk of the journalism profession. What kind of a place is it where they have a reporter who covers shopping? And nowadays, retail writer, everybody's got retail writers.
Yeah, the other point, I think that Kendrick is absolutely right. At Fashion Island, there was a J.C. Penney's. And, we thought that was going to be a great success. It was the largest J.C. Penney's constructed. It failed. Why? Because people didn't want to shop there. They wanted upscale. And that's where the Segerstroms were geniuses, because they started signing leases with these very prestigious firms. And people like that. The affluence of Orange County allowed that to succeed.
Well, talking of the signing leases, that's why South Coast Plaza went over Fashion Island that way. Henry Segerstrom, they say, he was going all over the country, all over the world, as he says in his documentary, and he could say, you want to be in? And he'd sign him right there. The Irvine Company went through three major changes. First, of course, was the foundation, and then came the group, including Al Taubman when he ran it, and then came Donald Bren. And it was very, very hard to do a deal with the Irvine Company. There was too much of a structure there. That's what my feeling is.
I agree with that, but also nobody knew the market, and the market was changing, and South Coast was right in the middle of this growing very, very affluent market.
Well, Al, I remember you worked to get the 405 freeway through University Park. Henry Segerstrom told me personally that he worked to get the freeway right by his shopping center. I remember he said that he was working with them and got that.
That was established, but you know, those there is so much history with these two centers, and what's happening is that the centers are evolving, kind of a combination of both. Fashion Island, shopping centers are being reduced to rubble and starting to build open centers, open malls and so forth. And people are always talking about, well, they're going to be obsolete. Amazon is going to inherit all of the shopping of the world. Well, I don't agree with that. And I think that there will be a need for shopping centers, but they won't have the big department stores that they had previously. That will be a reduced market. And you can, right now, May Company is closing 100 stores.
Macy's.
Yeah. Macy's,
yeah. Kedric, people say no one goes to South Coast Plaza because you can't park there.
So let me establish, Al, and of course, Kedric and Martin are frequent guests, and everybody knows about their writing and chronicling of not just real estate, but other things that are going on in Orange County. But you have a tremendous, tremendous history as a planner, not just of Fashion Island, but what are some of the other projects here in Orange County that you were instrumental in?
Well, I planned most of the residential areas on the Irvine, in what is now Irvine City. University Park, Turtle Rock, Linda Isle. I did all of the industrial complexes, named all of the streets. I had absolute control of the planning of the Irvine Ranch for a good many years. And
don't leave out Laguna Niguel.
I did the 7,000 acre. That was my first project right out of graduate school. I worked for Victor Gruen, and they plopped all of this land. Cabot and Forbes had purchased that 7,200 acres. And you know, we were very able to calculate what the future might be for that particular piece of land. It had no flat land, so there was the opportunities to build shopping was zero.
Did you have the vision back then that something big was going to happen in Orange County?
No, I have to admit that, you know, vision doesn't come easily. Walt Disney had vision and was very talented. No, I think that like I say, when I came, my wife and I came to Orange County, 250,000. Today it's what, 3.5 million?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to believe.
Yeah.
And
so let's tell us the story about Fashion Island. The key point being that it's an open air mall, which is you know, unique, and it really fits in. But you say it almost didn't happen.
Well, what happened was that Beckett had proposed a covered enclosed mall, and I was doing University Park. I was doing all these projects. Ray Watson said, "Trevino, why don't you do something? You work for Gruen, you know shopping centers." And I said, "I just don't agree with a covered mall." And it's happened just within days. Charlie Thomas, who was the president, came over to my office and said, "Would you ride with, I have the Prudential people, they're going to finance the center. And you know Laguna Niguel, and you can talk to them about what's happening in Orange County." So I got in the Cadillac, sat in the back seat, drove around. We were coming Pacific Coast Highway, making the turn up MacArthur, and Mr. Thomas turned to me and said, "Al, isn't that going to be the greatest center?" And I said, "You know, Mr. Thomas," you have to remember I was 28 years old, I think. I said, "You know, Mr. Thomas, I think that it's a mistake. I do not like the idea of a covered mall along the coast in Southern California." And he got furious. He stepped on the pedal, came back to the ranch headquarters, told everybody that I had just screwed up the financing. And
because
then
all the Prudential people were there.
they were sitting right there in front of me. And so there were several people, and John Parker, Al Auer, who I had become friends with, and they were given the opportunity, the responsibility to sign leases for this enclosed mall. But there's a project out of Chicago, Old Orchard, that I knew about, and I told Mr. Thomas, you're sending all of these people to sign leases. Tell them to go over to Old Orchard, outside of Chicago. It's an open mall, 3 piazzas, and they all came back and said, Trevino is right. This will work.
All right, what a great story! And an open air mall in Chicago is not a year-round deal, you know. I mean, it's seasonal. So anyway, in our limited time left, let's get into Henry versus Donald, because, as you know, Kedric, often in Orange County, it seems to come down to a rivalry of sorts. These two great visions, two great developers, and there's always been a rivalry there, and probably the rivalry centers more on that retail aspect than any other.
Well, what's interesting to me, and I never had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Bren, with the chairman. I've had many opportunities to meet and speak with Henry and with the family, so I can really more speak to that side of things, but also as an observer. You know, it's the focus on the details and being passionate about every single decision that both of them have. But when you really look at it, the Segerstrom's actual amount of land was much less. So they were focused on the buildings around South Coast Plaza itself, the art and culture, and you know, it's a much smaller farm. They did more with less. Whereas, you know, Mr. Bren, he had so much to spend time on developing. But what I never have understood, and somebody maybe one day will explain it to me, is why the lack of interest in having art and cultural institutions on the ranch, which the Segerstrom family took and ran with to such an amazing extent.
Martin, I think you're a good one to answer that.
That's one of my saddest things. South Coast Repertory Theater was on Harbor Boulevard in a little storefront. They came to the Irvine Company and said, would you give us 2 acres to do a theater in Newport Center? And we were all excited. Ray Watson, and oh wow, South Coast Rep. It went to the board of directors, and on the board was a gentleman I won't identify, but he's still around. He was from Los Angeles, and he said, oh, these theater companies, they come and they go. They'll put up this building, and they'll be gone in a year or two, and you'll be there with an empty building. So the board turned it down, and so they went to Henry, and Henry said yes, as he said in his...
Let me interject here. You know, you mentioned that they have land. That particular area, where Fashion Island is designed, is limited, because on one side you have the bay, the highways, and the ocean, and so it really is limited. So they had to optimize what they were going to do from a commercial
by the way, what
standpoint.
we're looking at right now are a side-by-side photo of what that site at Fashion Island looked like before construction began in the 60s and what it looks like today. And holy cow. And in just a moment, we're going to put up another graphic, Kedric, really to a point you were making, comparing the two. South Coast Plaza is the largest mall by sales in the United States. It's 3rd in gross leasable square footage. And you can see it's considerably bigger, but Fashion Island is no small mall. I mean, you can see taxable sales there approaching $2 billion and approaching $1 billion for Fashion Island. So anyway, a final thought, Kedric.
Well, it's just, you know, there was the Orange County Museum of Art was going to be an Lorenzo Piano designed, you know, museum right where Bristol Farms is more or less, or where the Civic Center is more or less, and the chairman decided not to go forward with that. So, you know, I've talked to the founders of South Coast Plaza, and they're very happy where they are because of that. You know, fish don't buy, but they also don't, you know, attend the theater. That by being in the center, they were able to attract a wider audience. But it's just one of those interesting facts, because.
Yeah. And thank you, Kedric, you get the last word. That's it for now. Thanks to my guests, Al Trevino, Kedric Francis, and Martin Brower. And thanks to my colleague Murray Hall Brown for the Henry Sagerstrom segment. You can watch this show and past shows by going to pbssoulcal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch our shows in our post-show open mic chatter, and we're going to do our Amazon discussion there on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University, with its Center for Science and Technology, under construction in Orange, California, is a proud sponsor of Inside OC.